What's up, Diablo 4 players? So let's get into it. What is the best Uber unique to craft after the updates? Because on the 17th, they are actually going to be buffing a bunch of the Uber uniques, so it's going to be very exciting. Maybe your first time you're going to be able to craft one because there's another update that makes the tormented bosses much easier. So now you can try to get one of those Uber uniques if you have not gotten one. Maybe you're still stuck at a boss. They're going to be reducing the HP by 30%, so it's going to be quite nice for anyone that still needs to get those extra sparks. But I get asked all the time while I'm streaming Slayer, what Uber unique should I craft? It's my very first one. And to make this video not long, because I hate when YouTubers take forever just to get to the point, there isn't a defined answer because I don't know what class or build you're playing. There are some builds like that require Tempest Roar, so I couldn't recommend the Harlequin Crest, but to kind of give you just like the quick answer for most players, the Harlequin Crest will be one of the top tier items. And the reason why is it gives you +4 ranks to every single one of your skills. You don't even need to put a point into it, and it's going to allow you to basically run skills without putting skill points in. This is massive as it basically adds like 80+ skill points to basically your whole entire tree. And on top of that, you got cooldown reduction, you got maximum life, and the all stats is actually going to get a buffed in the update because now they reduce the threshold required to hit some of these yellow nodes, meaning that it's going to be way better for you to actually run stuff with all stats because you may hit some extra bonuses. So Harlequin Crest is pretty much one of the top tier things, plus it also gives you just flat out damage reduction, which is considered a new premium stat, which used to roll on a lot of pieces of gear but no longer does. So the quick answer is going to be Harlequin Crest for, again, most builds. Now there is going to be some exceptions because not every single class can run every single item. So now we're going to get into the more niche nitty gritty, or maybe if you are looking at your second or your third Uber unique to craft after the buffs, which ones could I recommend? So we'll start off at the top. We'll talk about the buffs and the newer changes that are going to be coming out into the game, as well as kind of where it would actually see some sort of place in terms of the meta or on the pit ladder. Because while I can tell you, you can run whatever you want in a build, it doesn't mean that it's actually going to be good. So I'm going to only consider things that are at least somewhat relevant in the game that can actually clear at least like, tier 50 pit, because you can run a lot of these things on trash builds and it may make them a little bit better, but it's not going to like be build enabling. So the first one I want to start off with is Andariel's Visage. You are seeing gameplay right now of a build that takes advantage of this helmet, which allows you to have this lucky chance to do some sort of poison nova. That's all our build does for damage. This small amount of damage that I'm doing with my core skill is basically just for extra attack speed or other sort of buffs to activate some bonuses on lucky hit. The Andariel's Visage does all of our damage, and it's getting buffed because now we're going to have the ability to use maybe a ranged attack, and it'll apply the Poison Nova where it actually hits. And you can see, like, this build, you can actually use the Uber bosses, and even though this is only like a tier 50 here in the gameplay, you can go way higher with this. It just wasn't min-max for the gameplay. I just wanted to show you guys one build that can take advantage of this, and I kind of threw this together for the gameplay here. But this item is build enabling. It is brand new. Now, there's another thing that I hope will get buffed in the future, and that is lifesteal, because the only good stat that is special here really is going to be lifesteal. That there's no other item in the game that rolls lifesteal. There's Undying that gives you some sort of like percent of your HP, but it's not lifesteal. It doesn't actually work properly. If they ever fix this, this would be game breaking, to be honest. If it actually stole 2% of like the damage that you were dealing when you're dealing millions or billions of damage, yeah, you're going to be almost immortal if you don't get one-shotted. So I don't know if they'll ever fix this, to be honest, but we're just really here to look at that lucky hit chance. So it's going to deal more damage in the update and apply it on basically a range. So you might be able to do some sort of Heartseeker and Andariel build, and you don't have to be in melee range anymore, which is going to be pretty cool. But as far as like where I could recommend this, definitely number one for most players is going to be Harlequin. There are some exceptions, like the Druid needs, let's say, the Tempest Roar. But in this build, well, obviously, if you want to play this, you have to have it, and you can't just run the Harlequin. But as far as it goes right now, Rogue is the class that can take the most advantage over it right now because you have a separate thing to kind of add into a multiplier, whereas other builds, they may say like Elemental, or they'll say like Nature skills, or Werewolf, Werebear, they kind of have some sort of niche thing where it boosts something, whereas this, it just fairly favors the Rogue because of the way that they can boost just raw damage with close quarters. But pretty solid item if you're a Rogue player looking to play maybe a melee Rogue or even a ranged Rogue now with the more recent update that we're getting on the 17th. So yeah, this one over here, I would say it's kind of in the middle. It's very niche, though. It is really good, though. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a really good item if you want to play specifically the build that you're seeing in the gameplay. It's the only one, again, that is on the leaderboards. But for Rogue, this one, it's kind of a niche recommendation, but it's still not a bad one. I put it kind of towards the middle. Next one, this one's pretty much bottom tier. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I would not recommend crafting this one at all. And even though the Druid and the Sorceress could use this, maybe try to choose a high clear on a gauntlet or a pit, I don't really see anyone doing that. At the moment, there's no like, oh, this person cleared a tier 200 pit, they ran this item. It's just really hard to give up the tempering at the end of the day, and well, this item unfortunately has a really bad effect where it can only occur once every 30 seconds to get this bonus shrine that only lasts 20 seconds, and we also don't have shrine duration anymore because it got considered a legacy item. Well, it's basically not very good. So this one I can't really recommend. Just probably don't craft this unless you're like, you know, really niche and you're like, I really want those shrines. Hey, by all means, go for it. Maybe during that goblin like the seasonal like buff that we had for the anniversary, maybe if you had that shrine, it would have been worth it. But for the most part, it's not worth it. Don't craft this one. More likely just salvage it until they get another buff. But I don't know if we're gonna get any other big changes to any of the Uber uniques this season. It's probably done. So I would just say, unless you have like your 4th spark, just save it in case they randomly come out with an update. But pretty much this is towards the bottom of the barrel. There's no really like use for it. Next up, Doombringer. Now this has some uses on specifically the Thorns Barbarian. If you're interested in doing that, getting crazy amount of HP, that could be for you. But they're also buffing the damage on the lucky hit to be basically on the same level as Andariel's. But it's really just used for its defensive stats of getting crazy life. So because you can't temper it, well, unless you're building a lucky hit build, which maybe you can run Azarath, Doombringer, and Andariel's, and you can make some crazy build, stack as much lucky hit as possible, and you can have some crazy, like, you know, elemental synergy build. Would be kind of fun to make a video on that as well, but it's mainly used in the Thorns Barbarian. So if you're a barb, that's pretty much the only use case. Before, the rogues would run it because, well, you didn't have tempering. But now with tempering, yeah, it's too hard. You can't really give up that damage to crowd control on the rogue. It's just too much to lose out on. But next up, I already talked about Harlequin, so this is just for the Thorns Barbarian. It'd be, for me, like, what I consider this one, it's definitely more in like the niche category. This one, I already talked about it. It's pretty much one of the best ones that you can actually craft, especially at the start, because if you're first Uber unique, I recommend crafting the Harlequin Crest because it could be used in almost every single build. Again, there are very niche exceptions where you couldn't use it like in Andariel's, or if you're playing Druid because you need this very specific change. But for the most part, almost every single build can make use out of this. And because in this season, there are so many builds that use basic attacks as their main source of damage, this is excellent. Next up, Meltadar Selig. There are some like weird immortality things you can do with like Starlight. It's the one where it gives you extra resource when you do heal. There is like some sort of niche play with that. You can do some more cheesy immortal stuff with it, but for the most part, because you lose out on the tempering, that damage while healthy is not like a separate damage bucket like in like the alpha version of the game. It's not really that great anymore. Getting 60 maximum resource, you can get another item that's greater affix in plus maximum resource, and again, you're losing out on the amulet, which gives you 50% bonus when you are using a aspect. So I can't really recommend this one for anyone. Like, movement speed is great, but it's quite easy to get movement speed nowadays in the game, so it doesn't really have any sort of niche playstyle. Again, this one's probably going to be in the same level of like Spear. It's just kind of a skip right now until it gets a massive buff, but there is a little bit more of a niche with it, again, for huge survivability. But most people that are playing Diablo, they need more damage, right? So yeah, I can't really recommend this item at all. Next up, this one is actually getting a buff. So Ring the Starless, guys, it's going to give you a huge amount of damage bonus because it gives you up to 40x, and on top of that, it's going to reduce the resource cost by 40x. This is getting buffed to 50, so it's a 10% bonus, which is actually how it works. Is it's going to be 10% bonus on both of the stats. So it's a really good ring overall. If you are having resource problems, this can kind of solve them. It's also really good for its implicit, which is resistance to all elements rolling 2 times versus 1 random resistance plus all res. This is one of the really awesome items that I can highly recommend for a lot of builds. If your build though does not spend resource, then you could still use it for a huge like 50x multiplier. It's pretty massive. Again, I know it doesn't show it here because it's getting updated. That was the point of me making this video, so you guys will have it ready to go once the update launches. But yeah, this has really good stats. Like lucky hit, crit strike chance is good, and for some builds, if you're running precision, crit strike damage could be good, but for the most part, you're really using it for the resource cost reduction. I mean, you could run a greater affix and then temper resource cost reduction, then you're still out on that 50x. That 50x, it's getting buffed to that number. It's too hard to beat, to be realistic. So if you are playing a build and resource is a thing, it's a no-brainer. Craft this thing as maybe your second one. I'd recommend a Harlequin Crest number 1, Starless Skies number 2, if you're not playing like a bash build or something that doesn't use resource, right? And then the next one, as far as Grandfather goes, well, it's pretty much only Barbarian. Necromancer actually uses pretty much no uniques except for maybe Tyrael's, which we'll get into in a second. So the Grandfather, it is getting a change where like one of the stats where it would roll to ignore durability loss, and you could like greater affix on it, or it could be something that you would masterwork into. They're actually buffing it, so it's not going to be there anymore. So essentially, the masterworking makes it a lot easier to hit the good stats on it, which is in some cases it could be life, but it is seeing some play in a lot of different things because it gives you so much HP. You could in theory run it on like maybe you could do it on some sort of bleed variant that's already seeing play, and on top of that, maybe with thorns you could use it, but there's not a build with Necromancer. There's basically a barbarian only uber unique as of right now, but it does a massive amount of like crit multiplier, and that's why you'd run it in like the bleed. It is really, really good specifically for that. So I can only really recommend this one if you are playing barbarian, and it is kind of towards like more of a niche playstyle. It's again a very specific build. Everyone is pretty much playing bash, but I definitely think the bleed bash is a really, really, really good build if you're interested in doing the tormented, you know, level 200 bosses and you want to be the carry, you want to be invited to groups. Heck, this is a really, really awesome thing to play. This and specifically the Andariel's rogue build are just so great for bosses. So this one is an easy recommendation for barbarian if you want to play those sort of variants of the builds. So again, it's an okay-ish one. It's not like, you know, the spear or Beltador Selig. These ones I put towards the bottom. And then lastly over here, we've got the Tyrael's Might. So this one is actually quite good for the Necromancer. You're noticing like I didn't really get to mention the Necromancer, and that's because Necromancer doesn't really make use out of most of their like builds, because right now it's minions. Now they are getting some non-minion buffs, but I don't think it's anywhere near where like the top level is going to be Bone Spear like in Season 0 and stuff. Most people are probably just going to go ahead and play minions, and if you want to play minions, this one's an okay option. It's because that maximum resistance to all elements is actually massive. That is not just like another 5% damage reduction. To kind of math that out, basically, getting the plus 15 going from 70 to 85 is actually 50% damage reduction. It is huge. For those guys that played Path of Exile, you know the maximum resistance to all elements, or just plus to anything, is absolutely game breaking. That's why they have to cap it. It is so incredibly good. But also you get damage reduction, which is good. The whole barrage thing is getting doubled, and if your build can't scale this might actually not be that bad for certain builds. There's already the Bash Barbarian build that is already really popular, and they may want to transition into like a Whirlwind build. Whirlwind is actually getting a buff as well, and you get extra damage while berserking, and it's not a bad thing to go ahead and try out. Obviously you have to be at full life to take advantage of it. I was really excited to try this at Sorceress, but there's not like a plus like just raw damage like you get with like close quarters. Maybe you could try it out on Rogue too. But again, you'd have to be on full life, and that would help out if you maybe around like the I think it's called Siphoning Strikes with rogues, so you can actually heal up and stay up. So we'll have to wait and see if this is actually going to be very good, because sometimes they do some crazy stuff with this game, and there's bugs and things that aren't intended to work in a certain way. But as far as Tyrael Might goes, it's basically just used for that maximum to all resist. So if you need some extra survivability and you don't need a defensive aspect, hey, this could be maybe a pretty good option, because there's a lot of classes where you'll have like some sort of damage reduction, but you don't have like another good one to go and throw on. Like Necromancer is in that scenario. There's a lot of scenarios where it's like a 20% damage reduction on some sort of condition, right? And maybe you can't fit that basic attack in your build, so that would be something to consider where this would become actually pretty good. As far as it dealing damage though, if you want to like level up an ult, this is a really awesome item to level up ults with, because that full life skills releasing those barrages, it's really good at clearing out that kind of content. Plus if you are doing Helltide, which, you know, most builds at this point you can do Helltide, it's not a big problem at all, but it does help out with clear speed. So specifically with Barbarian, I have seen a few different like runs with Tyrael's Might, and it's actually quite viable. So this one, again, it can be a little bit more niche, but it's not like you can't run this on every single class, and it's like actually pretty solid. But like for the rogue class, for example, you'd probably want to run the chest piece that would give you some sort of bonus ranks to, let's say, Dark Shroud. So you can't really fit it in your build because that's pretty much required. But for some builds like maybe the Barbarian or the Necromancer, it's a pretty solid item overall. I like it. I can highly recommend that item. So to kind of go ahead and do quick little recap, number one choice for most players is going to be Harlequin. Everything Starless Skies is actually quite great as well. And then Tyrael's Might is another good option because it's just used in all, like, a bunch of different classes, if you get what I'm saying. And then there's more niche stuff like Andariel's, maybe the Grandfather. Starless Skies is, like, it's a fantastic one as well, as long as you're spending a resource. But I probably couldn't really recommend the Selig and the Spear. So that's my recommendations and my suggestions for which ones you should craft, maybe kind of in that sort of an order. That's what I would recommend as far as like the Uber uniques. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up things. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here, subscribe to the bell, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.